and welcome or welcome back to what has so far been a knitting podcast, but will hopefully cover other crafts in the future as well. My name is Jenny. I'm a Canadian knitter living in the United Kingdom. I've lived a few different places in the United Kingdom and have now settled in the last few years with my partner in the beautiful Northeast. We live kind of just below Northumberland, a 10-minute walk from the sea. It is an absolutely beautiful part of the country, so that is where I am coming to you from. Thank you so much for joining me, and let's jump right in. Okay, so diving right in, I think I'm going to divide this video into two sections. In the first section, I'll talk about my version of the sweater in particular, what wool I used, what modifications I made, because I did make some sizing modifications. And then in the second part, I'll talk about tension primarily, but colorwork techniques in general, what I did to deal with managing that tension in my first major colorwork project, but also some techniques that I've been looking into that I might try next time, because I definitely don't think my tension is perfect. I'm very keen to start on that learning curve. If you have any tips for how I can improve my tension, please do let me know. I'm keen to learn. I'm keen to try all the different techniques to see what's going to give me the optimal tension for my hands and the way that my body knits. So that's where we're going to be headed. And I guess the first thing to say is that I love this pattern and I love this finished object. This is the Autumn Alpine sweater by Caitlin Hunter from Boyland Knitworks. It is a sport weight pattern, or the pattern calls for sport weight yarn, but I knit this in fingering weight yarn. This is, I do have some of it with me. This is Rowan Valley Tweed. It's a fingering weight yarn. It comes in 50 gram skeins. I knit this in the colors High Force, which I can tell you the number for. High Force, which is 109 and is unfortunately being discontinued, though I think there is still some available online. Bought it on sale. And in the color Wolds Poppy. I do not have the button band, but I will put the number for that color in the description of the video, along with details for anything else that I talk about today. So I knit this in fingering weight yarn. I found the gauge for this pattern quite tight. I did a gauge swatch. I actually did two gauge swatches. This is the one that got me gauge. I had to go up a full millimeter from what the pattern called for. So I think that was using a 4.5 and a 5 millimeter. And it showed me that I was really happy with the colors. I was a bit worried about the colors because they're the same saturation level. This showed me that I was very happy with the colors, that I was really excited about the pattern. I think that this motif is gorgeous. But it was just a bit looser than I wanted it to be. The fabric was a bit airier, and I wanted it to be quite warm, so I decided to go down a needle size and knit the pattern at a tighter gauge. Based on the measurements stipulated in the pattern, I would have been knitting the size 1. Because my gauge was slightly off, I did some very rough math and decided to knit the size 2. As I was knitting, I was worried that it was going to be still a bit smaller than I wanted it to be. So I ended up knitting kind of between a size 2 and a size 3. And the way that I did that is I cast on for the size 2, knit the beginning of the chart for size 2, but fortunately the difference between the charts for the different sizes was often quite subtle, and it was quite easy to move between them. So I knit mostly chart 2 with some increased rounds, some extra rounds from the size 3 chart to lengthen my yoke to compensate for my short row gauge. That worked really well. I was really happy with the yoke, but then when I put it on scrap yarn after the yoke and tried it on, I was worried that it was still going to be a little bit smaller than I wanted it to be. So the pattern calls for an increased round right after the yoke before you split for sleeves, and what I did was I doubled the number of stitches that I increased on that round, and then I also increased, not huge, but I increased an extra 2 stitches under each underarm before continuing for the body. I also always do that thing where I pick up an extra 2 stitches under the underarms and decrease them in the second round to help close up some of the holes that can form in the underarms of sweaters. So in practice, I picked up 4 stitches more than the pattern called for in the underarms. And then when I started the sleeves, I decreased 2 on each sleeve. So I picked up an extra 4 on each sleeve, decreased an extra 2, leaving me with kind of 2 extra stitches on each sleeve. Subtle, but it did make a difference, and I'm glad that I did that. The other modifications that I made, well, first the modification that I didn't make that I wish that I had made. So I was knitting this over the holidays. I was knitting this in company a lot. We were staying with my partner's family in London, and because I was at the stocking knit stage by then, I thought I was fine to knit around people, knit while we were chatting. I knit while we were rewatching The Lord of the Rings as a big family unit, and that worked really well, except I went on autopilot and knit the body to exactly the length stipulated in the pattern. Which is a problem only because I am above average height and I always lengthen the bodies of my sweaters to compensate for my above average height, and I think I have a longer torso in particular. And I was enjoying the movie, I was enjoying the company, and I knit the entire bottom ribbing section. And well, maybe I can stand to show you, because one of the reasons I wanted to do this pattern was the gorgeous yoke, but I also wanted to do it because of these really beautiful really beautiful ribbing details. You get a chart for the ribbing. I was really excited by that. I think it's just beautiful. So I did this whole detailed ribbing section, and then once it was done, tried the sweater on and realized that it was really quite a bit shorter than I wanted it to be. It was maybe 2 inches shorter than I wanted it to be. I was too discouraged to rip back right away. I often find I don't mind ripping back, I don't mind reknitting things. I generally see it as part of the knitting process, but I can very rarely do it right away. I usually need to at least sleep on it, maybe put it away for a couple of days, come to terms with the fact that I'm going to rip back, and then I can very happily go back and enjoy the reknitting process. So I decided to knit the sleeves while I waited to come to terms with reknitting the body, and I thought that I had learned my lesson. And I knit the sleeves, I tried them on a lot as I went. I knit both sleeves kind of at the same time, or I knit one sleeve, but before I did the ribbing, I did the other sleeve, tried it on to make sure that the sleeves would be the same length and that they were the length that I wanted. I think that knitting both sleeves was also a good idea because it gave me some of the weight of those sleeves pulling the yoke down. I knit 5 extra centimeters, or 2 extra inches, on both sleeves, and the pattern gave some guidance for knitting before the ribbing until, was it 3 centimeters or something like that, or maybe it was 3 inches? That must have been 3 inches before you wanted the sleeve to end. Measured that, was happy, knit both ribbing sections on the sleeves, tried the sweater on, and it was bracelet length. It was here. And it's because I think of the way that the sleeve is kind of ballooned and then the ribbing pulled it in, and the pulling it in also pulled it up. And I was just thinking, oh my gosh, now I'm gonna have to rip back all 3 bottom ribbing sections, add in more stockinette, and then re-knit them. I was seriously considering doing some sweater grafting, going in and cutting so that I didn't have to redo that ribbing, and adding in the stockinette, then grafting the ribbing back on. But I decided first that I would try blocking it, because I've never knit a full Colourwork sweater before. I didn't know how that would behave once I blocked it, and I always think it's better to have more information. The more information, the better, before you make drastic changes, right? So I didn't weave in any of my ends. I made sure that they were secured, but I didn't weave any of them in case I was going to need to pull back. I wasn't sure whether I was going to pull back or graft. I just wanted all my options open, so I didn't weave in any of the ends, and I was really careful when I blocked that none of those got pulled, and I blocked the heck out of it. And thank goodness. I mean, blocking is just, I think there are a lot of things that are magic in knitting. Spitz placing, pretty magic. The way that any pattern looks like nothing the first few lines, and then all of a sudden it looks like what you want it to look like. Kind of all of a sudden in one or two rows it goes from looking like nothing to looking like what you want it to look like. Magic. Blocking might be the most magic. So I blocked the heck out of this and I got an extra inch to inch and a half, so kind of 4-ish centimeters out of all 3 lengths. And that was just enough. I'm happy with it. It fits really well over high-waisted pants and dresses and skirts. The sleeve, it rides up in its bracelet length. Sometimes that's fine, that happens, but I can also pull it down so that it's right at my wrist. It's a quite snug wrist on the sweater, so I'm quite happy with where it hits and how it hits. I'm really, really happy. Thank goodness for blocking. Thank goodness that I didn't rip back or graft before I blocked. So that worked out really well. And in general, it was a good learning curve. I can definitely do stockinette when I'm around people or when I'm watching a film, but I need to put some note in my pattern or highlight something to make a note to myself. Stop! Stop before you get to a big change and try that sweater on. But it all worked out for the best. I'm very happy with it. To give you a note on the yarn, because I had not worked with this yarn before, I chose this yarn in part because I really like Rowan. I have worked with some Rowan yarns before. Both of these yarns I bought on sale, and I'm thrilled with them. I think that they're really beautiful. They're a little bit rough in the hank, but they're softening up as I wear the sweater and are becoming really beautifully soft. It is not, I don't think it's a woolen spun yarn per se, but it's definitely a quite lofty worsted yarn. And so there's some air trapped in there. And this sweater is so much warmer than I expected it to be. At a fingering weight sweater, it's still not a super, super tight gauge, but the combination of the kind of double layer of the Colourwork and the loftier yarn, this sweater is like a warm hug. I'm completely in love with it. So that was a very nice thing about the yarn. I will mention that there were quite a few cut ends in some of the balls. In particular, the Wolds poppy. I had one ball where as I was winding it, I had something like 6 cut ends. So that was it was a bit of a surprise, but because it's a non-superwash wool, it was really easy to split splice. It wasn't the end of the world. And I would still definitely work with this yarn again, especially if it's on sale. It was a good deal. So I'm very, very happy with that. One final thing, I guess, that I wanted to say. One final thing that I did want to say about this sweater is I'm very happy with, as I told you, I worked on that swatch. The swatch showed me that I was happy with those colors. I still really love these colors. I was kind of thinking of folk art and all those beautiful reds and blues and this great pattern I thought would look so nice in those colors. I am really happy with it. As I was knitting, I started to realize that this combination of colors in this pattern, I think with, well, maybe my hair's in the way, I think with this kind of funnel neck and the slightly more ornate ribbing details around the sweater has made it almost a bit more formal than I expected the sweater to be. And that worried me a little bit for a while because I don't tend to wear formal sweaters very much. But a few things have come to mind since I realized this. One, it's not a terrible thing to have a sweater that feels a bit fancier. I am a cold person. If there's ever an event where I feel like it's not appropriate to wear one of my more casual cozy sweaters, it will actually be really nice to have a sweater in my wardrobe that feels a bit more like an event outfit or something that I could wear out to a nice dinner, that kind of thing. So not a terrible thing that it feels a bit more formal. I have also I'm wearing it today. I stood up before so you could probably see, but I'm experimenting wearing it with a pair of my high waist, quite casual, workhorse jeans. And I think maybe I just need to get over it. I think it doesn't have to be too formal. And so what if it is? I should still wear it all the time. So that's where I'm coming to rest on that. And yeah, I love it. I'm very happy. Okay, so moving on to tension. I won't talk about this too much, but this was my first Colourwork project. I had done a Colourwork hat years ago just to see what all the fuss was about. But I had definitely put off doing a full Colourwork sweater because I was a bit intimidated. It was less intimidating than I expected it to be, and blocking saved my butt in terms of length. It also saved my butt in terms of tension, for sure. There was a bit of puckering before I blocked, and blocking the heck out of that really, really made a difference. I had been reading up online and watching lots of videos about Colourwork before I started, and the two things that I did to manage my tension, especially because I'm a tight knitter and I knew that tension with the floats would be tricky for me, is I went up a 0.5 millimeter in needle size. So I ended up knitting this sweater in a size 4 millimeter, and I used a 4.5 millimeter when I did the Colourwork section. That worked really well, I think. The other thing that I did was that I really tried to stretch out those stitches on my right hand needle. Just stretch them out as much as I could. I think that I was still a little bit tight. And there was just a little bit of puckering before I blocked. It was particularly evident, I don't know if I can show you, it was particularly evident in these petals. There are a couple of sections where you do, I think it's only 3 or 4 stitches across, but it's 3 or 4 stitches across in the contrast color consistently for 3 rows. And I think in future, I need to stretch that even farther. I thought I was stretching that to high heaven behind those sections because I knew they would be tricky. I need to stretch those farther. High heaven is not far enough. But I think they were puckering partially also because the fabric is just so separate at that section. The contrast color is really lifting off of those floats, and so it let them kind of scrunch in on themselves. So I think that if I was knitting a Colourwork pattern that had that kind of area again, I would do a kind of intarsia wrap. Maybe not every row, maybe every second row or something like that, but just to compensate for that a little bit and manage that a little bit. I did, as I was blocking, put pins on either side of each of those petals to really try to get them to lie flat, and I think it's worked pretty well. I think you can't tell. So blocking and blocking pins, thank goodness. Other things that I'm considering are maybe going up a full millimeter in needle size, so 2 US needle sizes, especially if I'm feeling like I'm being a bit tight. If I'm watching something tense or something like that, I might consider going up a full needle size. Stretching the heck out has worked really well, I think. Another thing that I haven't tried is knitting the garment inside out. So not actually changing the way that you're working with the needles, but just instead of the sweater kind of sitting in your lap against you with the needles out here, folding it in so that the needles are closer to you and the body's inside out on the other side. I might consider that, and that just, I've read that, you know, some people really swear by that because it just gives the floats a slightly wider circumference on the outside of your needles to travel around rather than on the inside of your needles. So maybe that would be enough to make a difference. Have any of you heard this piece of advice? I think the most useful piece of advice that I've read, I've been reading a lot of blog entries, reading a lot of comment sections, I got a book on Colourwork out of the library, and I'm sorry, I can't remember where I saw this, but I think one of the most helpful pieces of advice that I've seen is that your floats should smile. Your floats should curve a little bit. And I think that before I blocked this, but now especially, my floats are pretty straight-faced. They're pretty grim, serious floats, so I need those to smile. So those are the things that I'm considering doing. As I said, I'm really happy with how this turned out. I don't think you can tell that I was having tension issues, but you know, it would be nice to have a little bit less fear with the next sweater and with subsequent sweaters, because I definitely don't think that this is going to be my last Colourwork project. I can't wait to get another one on my needles. I'm really excited. So that is where I think I'm gonna leave you. I've talked about the yarn, I've talked about the tension. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Have you knit any of the autumn alpine sweaters? Have you knit the autumn alpine sweater? Have you knit any Colourwork projects? Are you planning to? Do you have any secret tricks up your sleeve that I have not come across? Should I go up an extra needle size? Should I knit inside out? What will work? I'm really excited about that learning curve and excited about what Colourwork projects I'll be able to work on next. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm gonna leave you there before this video gets way too long and rambly like the last one, but I appreciate your company and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.